So good evening, ladies. What a great way to finish off the month of February by chatting with Jasmine Gilroy. Is that how you say that?
Guillory.
Guillory. About her recent instant New York Times bestseller, While We Were Dating. Before we get started, as always, a few quick thank yous. Big thanks to Jennifer Crowley for all she does for the group as far as running our Instagram and our daily deals. Thanks to Jasmine's publicist, Kristen Dwyer, who's here tonight, for helping us to coordinate the chat. And thanks to all the moms who have already read the novel, recommended it to their friends, or perhaps are tuning in to our YouTube page after the fact because you couldn't join us live. And last but not least, of course, thank you to you, Jasmine, for taking time out of your busy schedule to chat with the Peloton Moms Book Club. So before we get...
Thank you so much for having me.
Yes. So Jasmine is a New York Times bestselling author of 6 romance novels, including The Wedding Date, The Proposal, which was my first novel of yours, and While We Were Dating. Her work has appeared in O, the Oprah Magazine, Cosmopolitan, Bon Appetit, The Wall Street Journal, and Time. And you currently live in Oakland, California. So Jasmine, I always like to start our chats learning a little bit about our author's path that led you to becoming a writer. Many may not know that you're an attorney by trade, and it's interesting how many authors we have chatted with since we started doing these that are attorneys. So can you just share a little bit about your path of, becoming a novelist and leaving the legal practice, which I assume you have?
I have, yeah. It took a while though. I mean, my first 3 books I wrote while I was also working full time. So there was a lot of juggling early on. I think it's funny, there are a lot of lawyers who are also writers. Partly it's because I think becoming an attorney gets you used to like being able to track your time, like pay attention to what you're doing, be sort of diligent about your work. And I also think that it's in many ways like a break from what you do every day. Like one of the reasons that I started writing, it's because I realized that I needed some sort of creative outlet that I wasn't getting in my work. I had been, I think a lot of stories I hear from writers are like, I wanted to be a writer since I was little. That wasn't me. Like I'd been a huge reader my whole life. But it wasn't until I had been a lawyer for maybe 10 years that I started thinking about writing. Like I was in a job where I kind of realized that I wasn't doing anything like creative in it. And I missed that. Like I missed learning something new. I had been out of school for a while and I sort of missed that environment where I could get to like kind of try new things and fail without like there being a lot of pressure on that, when you're at work and trying new things and failing, then you get in trouble for it. And so it was nice to sort of dive into something that I kind of didn't know what I was doing, but it was okay. I was like, learning something new. I talked to friends who are writers who were really encouraging about it. And I just sort of like had an idea. I think a lot of people also will start with like, I'll write a short story. No, I was like, I have an idea for a novel. I'll dive right in. That was not my first published novel. I think everyone has like at least 1 or 2 that they wrote first. But I realized that I loved it. Like I was so excited to come home every night from work and like start writing. And so that sort of joy of the writing has really kept me going the whole time, even because it changes, right? When it's your job. And so sometimes when things are hard, I try to like get back into what was the thing that I loved about it to begin with. It took me a while, from when I first started writing to like getting a deal for The Wedding Date was at least maybe 5 or 6 years, something around there.
Oh wow.
And so it took a while, but it's been a lot of fun and very different than what I thought my career would be, when I graduated from law school.
Absolutely. So you mentioned it a little bit that you reached out to some of your kind of author friends, but who are some of those authors and who inspire some of your writing? I know reading has always been a huge part of your life and doing a little bit of research about you from an early age. So I know how important reading is. And so who were some of those authors either from the past or contemporaries of yours that inspire you?
You know, current writers and friends of mine, Amy Spalding, who is a young adult writer, and her first adult romance will be coming out next year. Heather Cox and Jessica Morgan, the Fug Girls, who like I have known for years just because like I used to comment on Go Fug Yourself all the time, and then I met them during, you know, one of their press tours for one of their first books, and then we became friends, and I told them like, oh, I'm writing this book, and they were so excited and kind to me the whole time and gave me such great advice. Brandy Colbert, who is also a young adult writer, like gave me a lot of great advice early on. Tayari Jones, who like is such a great like writer, gives so much of her time to younger writers. She like early on, I like when after the wedding, like a few months before the wedding date came out, I followed her on Twitter like for years, and she had like followed me back and we chatted occasionally. And so, you know, I posted something about a book coming out and she sent me a DM like, what's your publisher doing for you? And like asking questions. And then we were sort of writing back and forth, and she was like, you know what? It's late. I'm tired of typing. What's your phone number? And she called me and gave me like all of this advice of like things I should ask for and things, you know, that I should try to do and stuff. And like things like that have really inspired me. Partly just like, you know, the writing is so good, but it also makes me want to sort of reach out to other writers that I see and kind of help them coming up. Because there's so much you don't know. Like the publishing world is full of terms and things that I had no idea of. I remember my first meeting at my publisher, you know, a few months before the wedding date came out, I was sitting there with my agent and they were like telling me all these things that they were doing for the marketing. And I just had no idea what they were talking about. I was like, that sounds good. And after my agent, I was like, what like, is that good? And she was like, oh yeah, that's all good. But like, you know, they were throwing around things that, and so it takes a while to learn the language and to understand what's going on. And so I sort of try to, as much as I can, demystify that for people.
Yeah, that's been, as we've been talking with people, you know, other authors, the sense of community that it seems to exist is, I don't know, it's really inspiring and, you know, empowering and uplifting that you all seem to kind of, you know, really help behind the scenes. And, you know, whether it's, you know, reading or, you know, reading first drafts or, you know, offering advice or, you know, I think if you get blocked, you know, help with that. So it seems like such a great community. So it's fantastic.
Yeah,
All right.
it really is. It's great.
Yeah. So, okay. So you go from law to romance novels. Seems like a little bit of a big departure from writing legal briefs. And your books, for me, feature such great dialogue between the two love interests that you're right along on that ride with them as far as, you know, falling in love and and everything that leads up to it. How do you achieve that intimacy in your writing? And, you know, let's talk about some of those sex scenes, because those are hot. Like how do you go from, again, the legal world to that?
I think the first in the dialogue, like dialogue is something that I worked really hard on early on. I think in kind of the first book I wrote, I sent it to a friend of mine and she basically said, I mean, I'm sure she said this in a much kinder way. It was basically like, you need to work on your dialogue. And so I basically like set kind of a study list for myself of books that I had read and like remembered that the dialogue was good in. And so I started rereading them and like taking notes of kind of what the author did and what I didn't do. And this was from kind of a wide range of authors, a wide range of books, but like it really helped me see how different people do it, how I could do it myself. And it made me kind of pay attention to, you know, because like you're not actually writing the way people actually talk, right? Because people stop and start a lot. Everyone's interrupting each other. That wouldn't read very well. So you have to make it still sound like it's the way people actually talk, and that's tricky. So I really kind of paid a lot of attention to other books. I, you know, sat around and like eavesdropped on people and listened to them talk and like kind of saw the way they interacted with one another. And that was something, all of those things actually have really helped me with the dialogue. And that's actually what I mean, look, there are many terrible things about the pandemic, but one of the hard things I think for writers is that we have all missed those opportunities to eavesdrop that you just haven't gotten as you've been like alone in your house for so much. So I did that a lot with dialogue. I think with the sex scenes, I think for me, it's really important to like think about who the characters are and pay attention to them and like what they would want, what they find exciting and sexy, and also where they are in their relationship, right? Because it's different for if it's like the very beginning versus like once they kind of they're falling in love, have they realized they're like all of those kinds of things. It's different, and so that's something that I had to kind of pay attention to and think about. And like what kind of thing it would be, right? Like there was in my third book, The Wedding Party, which I'm not going to spoil it for you, but for all of you, if you haven't read it, but I had, I always outlined a book at different degrees, sometimes very detailed outlines, sometimes not. No matter how detailed, like I never abide by everything in the outline, but it's something that I like sort of always have to do before I start. And so in the outline for that book, I had like a scene where she sort of came into his office and like they had sex on his desk. And I was like, oh, really hot, sexy. And then I was like I was writing it more and figuring out who the characters were. And I was like, he would never do that. He's like way too uptight to ever do that. And so I had to like rethink the scene a lot and rethink who the characters were. And so I think that is a scene that would be great in some books, but it wouldn't have worked in this one because everyone reading the book would have been like, that's not who he is, and so it is something that you really have to think about for the characters and their relationship.
Yeah, well, as everyone's saying, yeah, it was unexpected, but it was an added bonus, right? So you kind of actually just segued perfectly into my next question, but when Anna meets Ben, there is kind of an instant attraction, but yet they quickly declare that nothing can happen because they're all, they're working together. And, we all kind of knew, well, that's not going to last, right? But how did you plot out the development of their relationship and what ultimately kind of pulls them together? Did you have that planned out and follow that, or?
I had some of it planned. It's funny because as when I first started writing, I would have much more detailed outlines than I do now. Now for me, it's more about like there's certain scenes that I know that I want to write, and then I will sort of get myself from one to the other. So a lot of times I am kind of writing, I often like will outline kind of the first third of the book, and then it's like, and then this big thing happens in the second third, and then this big thing happens for the end. And so then I will, once I get towards the end, I'm like, of the outline, I'm like, okay, let's figure out the next part. And so I did that more or less for this book. And also, I think, the really hard thing about writing this book was I had planned to start writing this book in April of 2020. I had I had a vague idea of what it was about. I was a writer in residence for a writing retreat in March. I was like, okay, I will go there. I will spend the 4 days that I'm there outlining this book and thinking through the characters. And then a few weeks later, I'll come home and start writing April 1st. Because I always have to give myself times that I'm going to start. And then that week while we were at the writers retreat, that first day that we got there, we're all sitting around drinking wine, having dinner, and someone looks at their phone and is like, the NBA shut down, Broadway is closed, Tom Hanks has coronavirus. It was that day that everything blew up. And I was frozen. I couldn't write. I couldn't think about a book that weekend. I sort of forced myself to journal and kind of brainstorm a little bit. So I came up with a few ideas that ended up in the book from that. But it took me 6 weeks, maybe more, to really force myself to to start this book. I wrote it in a very different way than I've written my other books. Like I hand wrote the entire first draft in like 2 large notebooks, which I did not plan to do at all. Like I tend to handwrite the first like few pages, because for me, I think I hate the like blank Word document. So I'll just, write a little bit in a notebook and then type it up, and then I can just keep going. And then I just like didn't start typing for a really long time because it felt too, in May of 2020, it felt too overwhelming to like write a book, I was like, I don't think I can do that. Like I send my poor agent, I sent her, I think like, I don't know, every 3 weeks. And, because I had a deadline, for this book. And I was like, I am not turning this book in on time. Make sure they know that I'm not doing it. She was like, okay. And then, I sort of forced myself to start working on it, mostly just like, so I would have something else to think about, so I put my phone down and stop scrolling. And so it's, some of the stuff kind of came to me a little slower. The funny thing is I knew who Ben was very early on. Like I kind of figured him out. It took me a while longer to figure out Anna, but like once I did, then everything kind of fell into place. Like I tend to kind of write very long and like messy first drafts where there's a lot that I cut in the end. This one, there was sort of a point in the middle of the book where I wrote a scene and I was like, I know it now. Now I know the rest of the book. And actually like the rest of the book was more or less, not exactly, but like most of the rest of the book is exactly how it was in that first draft. Because there's always a point where I figure out a book. Usually it doesn't come in the first draft, and this one it did. But every book writes itself a little bit differently.
Yeah. So let's talk about Anna a little bit. Obviously, she's our main character, and she struggles between living the public persona as a Hollywood actress and her private persona that she is kind of as a daughter and a sister. Did you base her loosely on anyone that you knew, or as a public figure, someone that
not really
we know about? Or
I knew going into the book, I knew like for a while before I wrote it that the book was going to be about Ben, because Ben had been a character in one of my previous books. So I knew the book was going to be about Ben falling in love with a movie star. Like I kind of knew that, but I didn't really know much about who she was. And so early in the book, I kind of thought about Anna a little bit. I like the first scene I knew from the like maybe a year before I wrote the book, I knew what the first scene was. And then like certain things took a little bit longer. And so I was kind of figuring out who she was, what she was worried about. But like, because I was writing the book, like in the, first 6 months of the pandemic, it was kind of impossible for me not to be thinking about mental health, because that's what we were all thinking and talking about. And so it just felt natural to me and made sense to have that be something that was always on her mind. And then once I kind of figured that out, everything else, a lot of other things fell into place about Anna.
And so as she is an actress of color, sorry, my puppy just up to join us. Live Zoom. Color, and she's plus size. Obviously I think it would be natural that she had a lot of insecurities in a very tough industry. I'm curious, did you face similar challenges in the legal profession that you drew upon? Was it, did you?
To a certain extent. I think not just in the legal profession, right? I think every professional Black woman faces similar challenges that they, people just don't respect them as much, are always confusing them with like, oh, you and the other Black women, are you the same person? Like all of that kind of stuff. And some of it's that, some of it is the good stuff, right? Like I definitely, like when I was thinking about her relationship with her best friend, a lot of that came from kind of my experiences with like the friendships I've made that were like forged in fire, right? Like you become friends with someone through because you go through a difficult experience together and then you're like friends forever. And so that kind of that made me think of that friendship. So there were definitely lots of like small things in my life that I thought of in kind of thinking about Anna.
Yep. So when Anna and Simon propose the, call it pretend relationship, if you will, it's a bit of a role reversal, and I really appreciated kind of in a way it was like female empowerment in a way, right? But I was curious why Ben was so willing to do it. Is that, what's your thoughts on that?
You know, Ben is just a guy who will kind of do things for a lark, right? He was like, this sounds like fun, sure. You know, he liked Anna, he liked hanging out with her. He was like, I mean, I can pretend to be a famous person's boyfriend for a few months, like why not? And you know, Ben is always kind of that person who does something unpredictable. Like when he tells his brother that he like drove to Palm Springs overnight, his brother is like, yeah, right, okay, of course you did, you know? And so that is kind of who Ben is. Also, I think, you know, there was a lot of Ben was trying to avoid things in his life, right? He didn't want to have to like meet his sister. It was a good way to kind of get out of that. And so things like that he didn't really want to think about, it kind of gave him an out.
Yep. That makes sense. So quick question from, what is your personal favorite romance trope to write or to read? And are they the same or different?
I mean, to read, I love A Marriage of Convenience. Love it. And I love fake dating, and I feel like those two are kind of similar in many ways because it's sort of a like the two of you are trapped together and then you fall in love kind of thing. And so, you know, yes, of course there's a reason that I like my first romance was a fake dating romance because it was like I find it so fun to read, and I also think I find it so fun to read, but there are also like specific things that I think make them work and don't make them work, and so I thought it was fun to like experiment with that and see what would happen, and so so I had a lot of fun writing that book.
And there were some laugh out loud moments in the book, especially for me, this scene where she got in the suitcase. I mean, to get past the paparazzi, I was literally laughing out loud. Is it hard to write those funny scenes?
Like it's funny because that was definitely one of the scenes that I knew was going to happen like from the very beginning. And so scenes like that I really look forward to writing because I have like this vision in my mind that I want to get right. And so certain things like I'll write it and things like, no, that's not how it was in my mind. I want to get this one right. And so those are, because I think I know writers who like will write stuff out of order. I can never do that. Like I always have to write in order. And part of that reason I think is because I look forward to writing certain scenes and they're kind of the like shiny diamond keeping me going every day. And then I'm like, now I get to write that fun scene. And so, so yeah, I have a lot of fun with scenes like that.
I mean, it's just hilarious. I mean, I loved, for me, it was like the message that like never to take your life too seriously. And, you know, I just thought it was really clever and fantastic. So, all right. So again, a little more research about you, but it sounds like you come from a family of therapists, and we touched upon this a little bit of, you know, in terms of the importance that therapy played for both Anna and Ben. So do you think that therapy would have played such an important role if you hadn't written this book during the pandemic? Because I think obviously therapy has exploded.
Yeah.
You know.
Well, you know what's so funny actually is that you know, it took me a little while to figure out that like kind of mental health was a thing for Anna, and that's kind of what her journey would be. But in the first book that I wrote that had Ben as a character, The Wedding Party, his because that's the story of his brother, and I didn't even remember that I'd written this. I was like kind of in maybe a quarter of the way into the book and I was writing stuff. And then I remembered that his brother at one point complained like, oh, my brother always talks about going to therapy, but I think he just likes to talk about himself. And I was like, oh, Ben's already in therapy. Great. And so I think like, I know I would have had to talk about that at some point because I would have wanted to explain, because once I remembered that I wrote that, I was like, all right, well then why did Ben go to therapy in the first place? Like I need to figure that out. And so I had to like think through that and then write about that. And so that I think definitely would have played a role. I don't think mental health would have played as big a role if I hadn't written this during the pandemic. I mean, I think it was, I'm sure, at some point, because I told this to both of my parents who are both therapists, like it was, of course I was gonna have some therapy in the book eventually, right? But I think, of course it played a much bigger role than it would have because of the pandemic.
Yeah, that makes sense. So are there any plans to develop while we were dating for the big or small screen? I didn't see anything yet.
Not for right now, but let's all keep our fingers crossed. I think that would be so much fun.
So we always like to ask this question. Do you envision anybody playing Anna or Ben?
What's funny is that I am never good at this question because I always have a picture in my mind of like exactly who the characters are, but it's not like a real person. It's like who I've, kind of thought of as I'm writing it. So I always have to ask my friends, like, who do these people remind you of? And they always have good answers. But I'm never good at like dream casting. I need to have a better list of that.
Yeah. Well, whoever did the cover, I'm not sure, but I mean, this picture is so spot on and perfect.
I love it.
So I have to share who I was envisioning. I envisioned either Michael B. Jordan or Shamar Moore, I think, as Ben, and then Gabrielle Union was for sure my Anna for some reason. Yeah. That was who I was seeing. All right, so let's take a few minutes to tease that little book that's behind for me. It's here, right back there. It's called Your Next Book, which will be out May 3rd, is By the Book. And I believe it is the second meant to be novel. So for those who don't know the backstory, can you tell us a little bit about that? Julie Murphy wrote the first book, If the Shoe Fits, I believe.
Yes. So Disney is doing a series of books that are like contemporary retellings of the princesses. So Julie Murphy's was the Cinderella book, If the Shoe Fits. And my book is the Belle book. By the book, it is about Beauty and the Beast. So these are all being published by Disney Books. They have at least 2 more that I know of coming out in the series, but I'm not allowed to tell who those are yet. So it was really fun to write thinking about Beauty and the Beast sort of in the present day, to write a Black Disney princess, which was so fun for me. I'm excited for the world to get to read it.
Awesome. Well, we just shared the link to pre-order if anybody's interested. It's in the chat. But the teaser for the book it's described, and it sucked me in right away, reimagining of a beloved fairy tale as old as time for the modern generation. So what can you give us any little glimpses of the book?
So Isabel is works in publishing. She's an assistant to an editor in a big New York publishing house, and her editor signed this guy who's like a sort of celebrity kid to write his memoir years before, and then he's sort of disappeared and has done nothing. And so they send Isabel to go knock on his door at his house in Santa Barbara to see if they can get him to do something with his book. They've been trying to get him to have a ghostwriter, any of that, and he just ignores it all. And so she ends up moving in with him and helping him write his memoir.
Yeah, Bow Towers. Everyone loves that. It's so cute. And obviously Isabel was a conscious decision, I'm guessing, that name.
Yes.
Yeah. So how were you contacted? Like, how did that all come about that you were selected to kind of, were you chosen by Disney specifically, or?
Yeah, they reached out to my agent and said like, are there any princesses that you love? And I was like, yes. And so that, and then we kind of, kind of wrote an idea of something that I thought I could write. And then, it really kind of changed and developed through time. Because I think I signed that deal. This is the thing with publishing, right? Like you sign, things can happen kind of a long time before. So I think I signed that deal in 2019.
Oh, wow.
Maybe 2018, like yeah, and the book isn't coming out until now, and so it sort of took a while, and then we had an idea for what the plot would be. I wrote a big outline and sent it to my editor. She was like, great. And then I started writing it, and kind of a third of the way into writing it, I was like, no, this isn't working. I think Isabel has to be a totally different person. And so I emailed her and I was like, so what if? And then luckily it all worked, but it did mean that I had to kind of dump a lot of what I had already written. But I knew it would make for a better book. So there was a lot of back and forth, but it was a really fun writing experience.
So did you write by the book before while we were dating, or after?
I wrote it after.
Oh, okay. So this is also written during the pandemic.
Yeah.
Wow, you turned out too. That's impressive.
It is not, it makes no mention of a pandemic, but as you're reading the book, you're like, oh, wow, she definitely wrote this during the pandemic, didn't she? Like, I didn't even do that on purpose, but there was like when I was doing kind of the final read of the book, I was like, oh yeah, it was a pandemic book, all right. These two are stuck in a house together. Oh, okay, yeah.
Oh, it's gonna go one of two ways. Well, we are super excited for Buy the Book. We will look. I think we're going to be doing a giveaway, so watch for that, everybody. And would love to have you back to chat about that when it gets closer. And this will actually maybe be back to a little bit of normalcy as far as getting to go out and promote the book.
I hope so. Yeah. We're trying to plan stuff for that now, and so we're all keeping our fingers crossed, I think, as we are about everything these days, but
right.
It seems like we'll get to do more of that kind of stuff. So I really missed it. Like, I've missed getting to meet readers in person so much. So I'm really looking forward to being able to do book events.
Yeah. Well, hopefully for you, but we certainly love doing things like this. So, all right. So we always like to kind of end our chats hearing what you're reading and recommending right now. And I'm really excited about this just because I know what an avid reader you are. So what do you recommend?
Right now I'm in the midst of two nonfiction books, actually. One of which is Scoundrel by Sarah Wyman. It just came out this week. It is about it's a story of basically a murderer who got off death row because a whole bunch of William F. Buckley and all of these famous conservatives decided that he must have not done it, and they got him off death row. And so it's sort of the backstory of all of that. It's really fascinating. I a lot of times I find true crime a little too it seems like it cares too much about the criminal and not about the victims, and that's not this book. The writing really cares about all of the victims of this crime, and it's a really fascinating story. And then I'm also reading a memoir called This Boy We Made, by Taylor Harris. I think that's the author's name. She's a mom, a Black mother, who, when her son was almost 2, he had kind of a medical crisis, and then they discovered that he had a bunch of kind of developmental delays that they couldn't put a finger on. There was no exact diagnosis they could get for him. And so it's about what she and her family went through, all of the kind of ways that they were helped and not helped by the system. And it's really an absorbing read. I'm having a lot of fun with it. And then I have to recommend a book that's coming out in 2 weeks, 3 weeks, something like that. In a New York Minute by Kate Spencer is such a fun read. It's a great romance novel, but I think I read the whole book in a day when I first got an advance copy. And so I'm so excited for people to get to read it.
Yes, actually, Jennifer and I just got that. So we're looking for. I know I'm looking forward to it. My pile is pretty large right now, but that's at the top of it. So, yeah, I've heard great things about that book. So
Yeah,
that's exciting. Yeah. So I have to ask one more question that I meant to ask before I asked about the books. But do you think you'll always just write romance, or with your legal background, do you ever see yourself writing some sort of legal fiction with a strong female character?
I mean, what's funny is like that, not so much. I could definitely see myself. I've always loved young adult. I could see myself doing that. Doing sort of more like, women's fiction kind of stuff. That's not quite romance, but almost. But I think you have to be you have to have a certain take on it to like write interesting legal fiction. And I don't know if I could do that. And also sometimes that's like a thriller, and I am not a real thriller reader. I'm too much of a scaredy cat for that. Like I don't like anything that's gonna give me bad dreams. So yeah.
No, we know about your dreams.
Yeah.
Awesome. Well, before we go, where can everybody follow you on your socials? Are you just? I think you're just yourself on Instagram, as I recall.
Jasmine Pics on Instagram. I'm the best Jasmine on Twitter, and on Facebook, I'm Jasmine Guillory Writer.
Awesome. Well, we are so excited about your success. We're very much looking forward to buy the book coming out, and we would love to have you back. And just a huge thank you for joining us tonight, Jasmine. This was delightful. It was so fun.
Thank you so much for having me. You guys have been great.
Awesome. Well, have a great night, ladies. Bye-bye.